Okay, this reading is from Rays of the Same Light and is entitled The Two Sides of Renunciation and How They Affect Every Devotee, or Victory Demands the Courage of Conviction. This first passage is from the Bible, and the quote from Jesus is, "Think not that I came to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes shall be they of his own household. He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he that taketh not his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it." This is the commentary. In this important passage, we see Jesus placing strong emphasis on austerity. He didn't equate austerity with harshness, but with unswerving dedication to God and to the divine search. It would be easy to take Jesus' words here literally as bellicose, which means warlike. If, however, we consider them in the broader context of his life mission, we quickly see that he was speaking thus only to light a fire of divine courage in the hearts of devotees. In saying that he had come not to bring peace, but a sword, he wasn't being a firebrand revolutionary. This, in fact, is how certain modern writers have described him. He meant sword symbolically, referring to the determination one needs to find God. Sword, in this sense, is an apt metaphor, for the devotee must be prepared to do battle in his confrontations with delusion. Sword is also a reference to the keen-edged power of discrimination, which severs the bonds of outward attachments. Jesus' reference to setting a son against his father and a daughter against her mother was not an attempt to destroy the family unit. It was simply an effort to inspire his disciples to sever their emotional attachment to everything and everyone. The power of cosmic delusion is conscious and tries to keep all men bound to matter. The satanic force holds before our imagination attractive scenes of family and home life. It suggests to the mind the pleasant normality that worldly people share. Others live this way, it says. Why do you presume to be different? Indeed, even if one's relatives are worldly, one should always love them in God. A relative who shares one's love for God is, moreover, a great blessing. But if the only thing one's relatives want is to wrap him in familial warmth, he then faces a choice between accepting the ego identity they represent or expanding his sense of kinship to embrace all mankind. Jesus himself made it clear that family and other relationships as such should be respected. Anyone, however, who opposes the devotee in his search for God must be met with firm resistance. This does not mean that one shouldn't inwardly bless everyone, friend and self-defined foe alike. He that taketh not his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. The spiritual path is not for armchair devotees. It is for spiritual warriors. The path is for those who would embrace death itself rather than abandon their divine search. He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. The devotee in deep inner communion with God attains a state where he realizes that the next step is to offer his very ego into the ocean of bliss. Thus alone is it possible to attain union with God. It is a great challenge. The entire spiritual path is a training for this moment. All the service, the devotion, the discrimination, the humility, the chanting, the meditation. Whosoever draws back from this final offering makes the choice to maintain his separateness from God. Losing courage even at this late stage on the path, he loses the opportunity to attain infinite life, at least for this lifetime. The destiny of the soul lies in realizing the truth of Jesus' words, "I and my Father are one." Now from the Bhagavad Gita, the 14th chapter, in these stanzas Krishna describes the enlightened sage. Unaffected by joys and sorrows, or by praise and blame, secure in his divine nature, regarding with equal gaze a clod of mud, a stone, and a bar of gold, impartial toward all experiences, whether pleasant or unpleasant, firm-minded, untouched by either praise or blame, treating everyone alike, whether friend or foe, free from the delusion that in anything he does, he is the doer. Such a one has transcended nature's triune qualities. In this passage we find expressed the positive side of austerity. Austerity as presented here doesn't mean fanaticism or exaggerated self-discipline. Rather, it signifies the calm realization that this universe is only a dream, and that nothing matters except God's love and the eternal joy of loving Him. Strenuous effort is required, certainly, especially in the early stages of the spiritual life, to reject all delusive attachments and desires. The devotee can avoid discouragement by reflecting on the bright side of renunciation, the soul's eventual freedom in God. In that divine state, he should remind himself the soul will be untouched by delusion of any kind. Devastating storms of emotion may rage around him. He will remain ever at the storm's center, blissful, self-possessed. Renunciation without the thought of its higher purpose may set a person in conflict with himself. Or again, one who embraces renunciation for its own sake may sink into that smug self-righteousness, which is more or less the only reward people get who follow the spiritual path joylessly. When a businessman reinvests some of his profits instead of spending them, it is in the hope of increasing his prosperity. And when a person refrains from replying cuttingly to a verbal assault from a friend, it is to preserve their friendship. Mature human beings realize that worthwhile goals can be achieved only if they invest energy toward them instead of squandering it. The same is true on the spiritual path. Renunciation represents an investment, the lesser interest in exchange for the greatest of all possible gains. People often remonstrate, "When you go off and meditate, you are only avoiding life." This charge can be answered with a simple question. Do they themselves reproach high school graduates for going on to college instead of immediately seeking jobs? Certainly not. They know that a higher education will help them to find better jobs later on. The same is true for the spiritual search. The devotee who meditates daily gains increasing mental clarity. In this sense, indeed, he finds immediate benefits from meditation as well as long-term ones. His increasing inner clarity enables him to cope efficiently with the most mundane problems. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Hello, everyone. Namaskaram. So nice to see you all, which is what I was saying when the microphone was off. And I find both these readings from the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita very thrilling, because as Swamiji wrote, they're meant to light a fire under the devotee's feet. And just a little background, in India, the Bible is not a popular scripture. It's very much in the minority, so people aren't born with it. And for especially those who are new, it is very much an integral part of this path, because it began with Christ coming to Babaji and saying, basically, let's unite our missions, if you want to put it that way, in Kriya Yoga. And so, we honor Christ as one of our gurus. And in that way, when we're reading the Bible, you look more as Christ as a guru, not in the traditional Christian sense that happens in the Christian religion, but in a sense of you can see throughout the Bible stories of disciple-guru things happening. And so that's the string that Yoganandaji picked up the life of Christ with, and that we honor on this path. And hence, Babaji came to Sri Yukteswarji and said, write the holy science, which one of its main premises is comparing the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. Then Yoganandaji wrote many, many commentaries comparing the two scriptures and also interpreting the Bible in a yogic way. And so in that way, the Bhagavad Gita is very obviously yogic. The Bible is not, when you just read it plain and have no way of interpreting it. But we're given the gift of this interpretation and able to understand it much more clearly. And the Bible was written, the whole events of things happened in Kali Yuga. So the deeper meaning of things required people to tune into that deeper meaning. Whereas the Bhagavad Gita was written in Dwapara Yuga. We're now in Dwapara Yuga, ascending. And so the consciousness level is there for better understanding. Of course, there's deep inner understanding that is not obvious, and that's just part of the spiritual path and spiritual progress and understanding that we gain over the years. But still, the words themselves spell out very clearly the spiritual path and the way of living life on the spiritual path. The Bible does too, but it requires some interpretation. And so you can imagine, though, these are the words of Christ, what he was actually saying to his disciples. Let me just re-quote a little bit of this. Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. You can just imagine the disciples sitting around him going, okay, what does he mean by that? And for I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against his mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes shall be they of his own household. He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me, and he that taketh not his cross and followeth after me is not worthy of me. He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loses his life for my sake shall find it. So you can see how someone who just decides to casually open up the Bible, this is not something that one would say, oh, I'm going to do that. That's just and yet he is talking about renunciation here. And Swamiji clarifies and clears up any misunderstanding we could have about this reading, in that, really it corresponds to what is day to the everyday man is night to the yogi, and what is night to the everyday man is day to the yogi. Really, the opposites come into play once we start following the yogic path. It seems as though it doesn't make sense, but from the inside out, it makes perfect sense. And so, anyway, I wanted to point out how so much interpretation is needed in this, and it basically means, do we just go for familial warmth in this lifetime? Or do we go for something deeper? And it doesn't mean that the two can't exist, except in the level of comfort we get from the divine versus from outer things. Where is our comfort level? Where do we get our comfort? On the spiritual path, slowly but surely, we transfer our comfort level from finding comfort in outer things to finding comfort inside. It's a progressive thing that happens through meditation and through practicing right attitude. It's, something people will think, well, I just want to get there now. I just want to feel only good in God now. And that's the fire we have to pursue that. But just saying it doesn't make it so. And so but the desire for it is a true desire, and definitely the right goal in the right direction. And so, Christ was kind of waking up his disciples saying, hey, where are you going to put your comfort? Where are you going to find your comfort? Are you going to find it just in your outer circumstances, or are you going to find it with me, meaning the divine? And he's speaking as a guru. And the guru requires attunement. The guru requires that we tune into the deeper meaning of what he's saying and not just listen to the outer words. And so those who had ears were able to hear what Christ meant back then. And my guess is those who were not able to attune themselves might have walked away, might have, suppose he was speaking out in public, you might have seen half the crowd walk away. Like, what's he talking about? So, that's a way of pairing out the disciples, those who are serious versus those who aren't. He was not speaking to say, it's okay, you're doing great, don't worry about it, we all make mistakes. He wasn't talking like that. He was saying, make a choice, light a fire under your feet, and walk the direction that you are meaning to walk, and make a commitment. So he was being quite strong. And, there's so many sides of the spiritual path. And very often we are overly strong and critical of ourselves. And so we don't necessarily need to hear the words of, look, make a choice. Choose between the material and the spiritual now. Get going on this path. Start meditating more deeply. Start putting your mind on God more often. We often tend to like to hear the Divine Mother version of things, which is, I love you no matter how many mistakes you make, and you're trying your hardest, that kind of a thing. So there's kind of both perspectives on things. But I'll talk a little bit on the purpose of renunciation in this situation. When we use the word renunciation, I remember when we first started teaching about renunciation here in Chennai. And, when you say the word renunciation, I think the first thing that jumps into people's minds is a monk or a nun, someone who has the outer garb. We showed up in blue, the Nayaswami order. So, okay, renunciation, it means some form of lifestyle that isn't me. That I think most people say that. That's not me. I'm not living as a monk. I have my family. I have a job. That's not me. I'm not a renunciate. And yet, the whole message of this is the practice of inner renunciation. And inner renunciation that leads to joy, not inner renunciation that leads to a contractive, I must do things perfectly, opposite of joy feeling, which happens sometimes on the path. In fact, you can, in this Gita reading, so think of it this way. Okay, it's very easy to read this and misunderstand also. Unaffected by outward joys and sorrows or by praise and blame, secure in his divine nature, regarding with equal gaze a clod of mud, a stone, and a bar of gold, impartial toward all experiences, whether pleasant or unpleasant, firm-minded, untouched by either praise or blame, treating everyone alike, whether friend or foe, free from delusion that in anything he does, he is the doer. Such a one has transcended nature's triune qualities. You can see how someone who has an inclination towards austerity could read these words and think, oh, I need to be unaffected by joys and sorrows. I need to if you praise me or blame me, it doesn't matter. It's easy to try and say you're a renunciate by just outwardly renouncing, or not renouncing from the inside out, but just from without. And that leads to joylessness, because you have to tense up to reject. And you have to contract to reject. In this kind of way I'm talking. I'm not talking about a relaxed kind of rejection that can happen within the heart, but I'm talking about we can sometimes try and renounce or appear to renounce to others, and with that comes a, let me read the other thing that Swamiji wrote. Let's see where I have his quote. Well, let me find it. Okay. With renunciation without the thought of its higher purpose may set a person in conflict with himself, or again, one who embraces renunciation for its own sake may sink into that smug self-righteousness which is more or less the only reward people get who follow the spiritual path joyously. I think many of us have past lives of being renunciates. That we've lived in the caves. We've tried to renounce worldly things in life before, and here we are back in this life. It didn't work, did it? We didn't do it the right way, or we didn't do it completely, and we still carry in our samskars the old ways of doing renunciation, which is just completely, as I said, doing it from just an outer point of view. You're still relating to the object that you're renouncing. So the inner renunciate feels a true detachment in the heart from the object that they're renouncing. The object could be in front of them or not, and it doesn't make a difference if you've truly renounced it in your heart. But if you're just renouncing outwardly, you have that object there and you're repulsed by it. You're trying to push it away, push it out of your aura, that kind of way. When we reject out of repulsion, it creates an attraction. And I remember knowing some monks before who would say, "Ugh, women." And 5 years later found themselves married. It was a repulsion that they kept women out of their space. It was not coming from a true detached place of renunciation. So when we just push out from the outside, we're creating an attraction to those things coming to us. You know, we want to practice renunciation with self-honesty. So suppose we're giving something up. I don't eat popcorn anymore. It's a carb. I will not have popcorn. You know, and just the thought of I will not have popcorn can make someone say, I will have popcorn, you know. So you're pushing it away, pushing it away. This is a very superficial example. But you're pushing the popcorn away, pushing it away, and then the thought just can't get out of your mind. You may as well have it. So you've renounced it for a month, but then after a month it comes back. This is not true renunciation. And that renunciation has to come from within. It has to come, the smell comes and you don't even feel a reaction to it. That's true renunciation. You know, to make the thought of renunciation even more simple is, you know, from the moment people step foot at Ananda or onto the spiritual path, they're beginning to practice renunciation, whether they know it or not. You know, we begin with the Hong Sa technique. We then have our Raja Yoga classes. We then have the discipleship class. We then learn the Om technique, then Kriya preparation classes, then Kriya. So people go through this process of training on the spiritual path, and little does everyone realize they've become renunciates. And what's happening? When we choose to meditate, we are choosing to spend our time with the divine rather than doing other things. So when we make that choice, no, I'm going to spend this half hour, I'm going to spend this hour just with God, whether we're thinking our meditation practice is that or not, our soul is dipping into the divine. Whether our meditation is restless or not, we're still doing it. And during that time, we're making a conscious choice. I'm spending this time with my guru now. This is what I'm choosing to do for this next hour. And so that is renunciation. When we decide to practice the presence of God, which is trying to connect with our guru, connect with the divine, as often as possible throughout the day, to not forget that the guru is right there to give us all guidance in everything we do, that is a form of renunciation. Because what are we doing? We want to hear his advice rather than just hear our own dull-minded, problem-solving opinions. Let's put it that way. Not that we can't have wisdom, but it's so much more interesting to listen to what Master has to say. It's just so much more interesting. It may agree with what we are already thinking, but why not have that confirmation happen? And so that is a form of renunciation. You see, the more we choose God, which is very different than just rejecting the world. Rather than reject, we choose. So the more you choose to be with the divine, the more you are rejecting parts of the world, but you're doing it in a positive way, rather than developing a repulsion for other things, though that can happen after you've replaced other things with things that feel more spiritual for you. So we choose in a positive direction those things that bring us closer to the divine. The core of suffering is feeling a separation from God. That's the core of suffering. If in any way we're suffering right now, it's only because we're feeling distant from the divine. And the only answer is to get closer to the divine. It's just making that the goal. And you find that the closer you become with God, the more your mind spends time on God, the more interest you have on God and Guru, the more interest they will have in you, and the more comfort you will begin to feel in that divine presence. And you'll find yourself relying more and more on the comfort of the divine presence rather than the comfort in things or people's opinions or whatever it is that we need in the material world to make us feel better. You find that you rely less and less on those things and more on the inner feeling of the divine presence. And that is true renunciation. And so, don't we all want to be renunciates? We do. So we don't have to think of it just in terms of some outward vow someone has taken. That's a lifestyle choice. Swamiji makes that very clear in the whole Nayaswami order, that taking the vow of brahmacharya or taking the vow of Swami, these things are outward lifestyle choices in addition to the inner vow. He created that order to try and kind of shake up the thought of monasticism. It has its own purpose, and you can always read about it in his book, A Renunciate Order for the New Age. Very good book if you want to know more about the Nayaswami order and the whole purpose of it. But for most of us who are householders, married, children, husbands, wives, work, cooking, day-to-day things that we have to do, we learn to bring God in everything we do. And so no outward garb is required for that. And if you do it in the right way, a lot of the time your family won't feel displaced. But the more time you spend in meditation, of course, you're displacing some of that TV time or family time or whatever you're displacing. But that inner joy you feel, if you're in even the littlest of a supportive family, they will see you more happy, less reactive, and welcome it. And not only that, you can begin to spread that inner joy you feel from renunciation outward to everyone you meet, everyone you work with, everyone you live with. You become a beacon of light and also help others who want to be beacons of light as well. So really renunciation is where it's at, but we want to do it from the right perspective. We want to do it from the inside out. That's what leads to joy. That's what leads to bliss. God bless you.